Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation. Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on the Cornerstone Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I'm your host, Josh Peck. Today we're going to be talking about the Antichrist. So let's just jump right into it. The concept of the Antichrist is one of the most intriguing and controversial topics in Christian theology. There's a lot of differing opinions, countless debates, discussions, and interpretations throughout history, and its significance continues to be debated today. So the term Antichrist is actually derived from Greek word antichristos, which means opponent of Christ. According to Christian tradition, the Antichrist is an evil figure who will emerge in the end times, working to undermine God's plan and deceive people into following him instead of Christ. Now, the idea of an Antichrist has been a prominent one throughout Christian history, with numerous figures being identified as potential candidates for the role. In the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is often referred to as the beast and is associated with a number of other symbolic figures, including the dragon, the false prophet, symbolic or literal, depending how you take those. I would say that the dragon is more of a symbolic description, but the false prophet, I believe, would be a literal figure. And then the book of Daniel also contains references to an Antichrist figure known as the little horn. So despite the long history of the Antichrist in Christian theology, there's still a lot of debate and disagreement about what the Antichrist represents, who he might be, and what role he'll play in the end times. So here we're going to explore some various interpretations of the Antichrist, drawing on relevant Bible passages as well as the interpretations of scholars and theologians throughout history. So this video is going to be divided kind of into several sections. We're going to begin by examining the biblical passages that specifically reference the Antichrist, including Revelation, Daniel, and various other books of the Bible. We'll then explore the varying interpretations of these passages by historical figures and scholars, both ancient and modern. In addition, we're also going to examine the significance of the Antichrist in Jewish sources and explore various interpretations of the identity of the Antichrist, including those put forth by contemporary scholars and writers associated with like Skywatch TV, Prophecy Watchers, that kind of thing. What are people saying about it today in the futurist camp? And then we'll conclude by discussing the importance of recognizing the variety of interpretations of the Antichrist and emphasizing the need for Christians to, still treat each other with love and respect, regardless of our possible differing views on this or really any other topic. Let's just jump into Revelation. Revelation is obviously one of the most fascinating books of the Bible. If I had to pick a favorite, it'd probably be my favorite. And it's inspired countless interpretations and debates over the centuries. One of the most controversial topics in Revelation is the identity and nature of the Antichrist. This figure is mentioned several times in the book, and the descriptions of the Antichrist have led to many different interpretations and theories. So we're going to explore everything Revelation has to say about the Antichrist, including relevant Bible verses and quotes and things. So the term Antichrist is actually not used in the book of Revelation, but there are several descriptions of a figure that's widely believed to be that same person. So in Revelation 13, we're introduced to a beast that comes out of the sea. This beast is described as having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on each head is a blasphemous name, and the beast is also said to have a mouth that speaks blasphemy and to have been given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. The book of Revelation also describes the Antichrist as a ruler who will be given power by Satan. So Revelation 13, 1 through 2 says, "The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority." Revelation 13, 3 through 4 says, "One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?'" And later in Revelation 13, we're introduced to another figure that is often identified as the false prophet. This figure is said to have 2 horns like a lamb, but speak like a dragon. The false prophet is described as having the power to perform great signs and wonders, and he is said to deceive the inhabitants of the earth with his false teachings. The false prophet is also said to force people to receive a mark on their right hand or forehead in order to buy or sell. Revelation 17 describes a woman sitting on a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman is described as being dressed in purple and scarlet, and she is said to be holding a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. The woman is said to have a name written on her forehead: Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. The beast is described as being covered with blasphemous names and is said to be a symbol of the kings of the earth who have committed sexual immorality with the woman. Revelation goes on to describe the Antichrist as a persecutor of the saints who will lead the world in rebellion against God. So Revelation 13, 7 through 8 says, "And it was given to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world." Revelation 19, 19 through 20 describes the final battle between the forces of good and evil. The beast and the false prophet are said to gather their armies to make war against the rider on the white horse, who's often identified as Jesus. The beast and the false prophet are said to be captured and thrown alive into the lake of fire. So Revelation 19, verse 20 says, "And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. With these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The 2 of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur." So overall, the book of Revelation provides a vivid and ominous portrayal of the Antichrist as a powerful and malevolent figure who will deceive and persecute the people of God. Its descriptions of the Antichrist have been the subject, again, of a lot of different interpretations and speculations over the centuries. It continues to be a topic of interest and debate among scholars and believers alike. And there are many different interpretations of the Antichrist in Revelation. And scholars and theologians have debated the identity and nature of this figure for centuries. Some interpret the Antichrist as a literal person who will arise in the end times and oppose God and his people. That would be the camp that I would fall into. But others view the Antichrist as like a symbolic representation of the forces of evil that are present in the world. So regardless of the interpretation, though, it is clear from the description in Revelation that the Antichrist is a powerful and dangerous figure who opposes God and seeks to deceive and destroy his people. The Antichrist is described as having great power and authority, and he's able to deceive many people with his false teaching and signs and wonders. Now, as Christians, it's important to be aware of the Antichrist and the forces of evil in the world, but we should not live in fear. It is, of course, important to study prophecy, but not be like consumed entirely by it. Rather, it's good to have a healthy balance between end times prophecy and all other lessons that the Bible has to teach. So let's talk about some of these interpretations. By the way, if you're brand new to the channel, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. Um, and also head on over to dailyrenegade.com and you can get full videos that you can't find anywhere else. Not all of them are available on YouTube. Also, we are working to improve the site. That is happening right now. Like, we're in the process of it. And we're hoping to launch that soon. And it's looking like we'll also be able to get an app for your phone and TV for Daily Renegade. So some people have said that when they get on the website, they log in, they hit login, and then it takes a few seconds for the page to load, almost to the point where they don't even know if it's logging them in. It's not with everybody, but a few people have said that. It occasionally happens to me too. It's just because there's so many videos on there, and right now we go through Wix, which we are switching from Wix to Uscreen. But there's so many videos on there that the site just kind of gets bogged down. Once you log in, though, just hit login, give it a second, it will bring you in. Then once you're in, you should be able to play videos just fine. That's really like the main issue right now. But video playback, I haven't had any problems with it. But we are updating all that. So we would love your support. We'd love it if you come and be a member with us. DailyRenegade.com, and at the very least, please subscribe to this channel and share this around. Okay, so the interpretation of the Antichrist verses in the book of Revelation, again, topic of debate and discussion among historical figures and scholars for centuries. Different individuals and groups have interpreted these verses in various ways, leading to varying ideas about the identity, nature, and role of the Antichrist. So one of the earliest interpretations of the Antichrist in Revelation was held by the early church fathers. Some of these fathers, such as Irenaeus and Tertullian, believed that the Antichrist was a specific individual who would come in the future and lead the world into sin and rebellion against God. They viewed the Antichrist as a political leader who would establish a powerful empire and oppose Christianity. Another interpretation of the Antichrist in Revelation was held by medieval scholars. These scholars viewed the Antichrist as a symbol of the papacy and the Catholic Church, which they believed were corrupt and leading people away from the true teachings of Christianity. So this view is particularly prevalent among Protestant reformers such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, people like that. In the modern era, there have been various interpretations of the Antichrist in Revelation. So some scholars view the Antichrist, again, as a symbol of evil and the embodiment of all that is opposed to God. Others see the Antichrist as a metaphor for the struggle between good and evil, with the Antichrist representing the forces of darkness and destruction. Some scholars have also linked the Antichrist in Revelation to current world events and individuals. So, for example, some have identified the Antichrist with political leaders, such as Napoleon or Hitler. Others have suggested that the Antichrist could be a future political figure who will rise to power in the end times. One of the most popular interpretations of the Antichrist in recent years has been the idea that the Antichrist is a figure associated with technology and the digital age. This view suggests that the Antichrist will use advanced technology to control and manipulate people, leading them away from God and towards a dystopian future. So despite these varying interpretations, there are some common threads that can be found in many of them. So most scholars agree that the Antichrist represents a force of evil and rebellion against God. Additionally, many interpret the Antichrist as a symbol of the struggle between good and evil and the ultimate triumph of God over Satan. Revelation 13, 1 through 10 is one of the most well-known passages in the Bible that mentions the Antichrist, and we read through some of that earlier. This passage describes a beast rising out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns, and this beast is given power by the dragon, which is identified as Satan. And the beast is described as having blasphemous names on its heads and waging war against the saints. Another passage that mentions the Antichrist is 1 John 2, 18 through 22. This passage describes the Antichrist as someone who denies that Jesus is the Christ and opposes the Father. The passage warns Christians to be aware of false teachers who deny Jesus and lead people astray. And as we said in Revelation 19, verse 20, the Antichrist is described as being defeated by Jesus and thrown into the lake of fire. And this passage suggests that ultimately the Antichrist will be defeated and destroyed by God. The Antichrist verses in the book of Revelation have been hotly debated, lots of different interpretations, some of which we just went through. But at the very least, most agree that the Antichrist represents a force of evil and rebellion against God. But regardless of how somebody may interpret the Antichrist, whether symbolic or literal, I personally lean towards literal. But regardless of one's interpretation, it's clear that the ultimate victory belongs to God, who will defeat the forces of evil and establish his kingdom on earth. The book of Daniel in the Old Testament also contains prophecies about the Antichrist, which provide further insight into this enigmatic figure. So in the book of Daniel, the Antichrist is referred to as the little horn and the prince who is to come. Daniel chapter 7 describes a vision of four beasts, which are interpreted as representing four kingdoms or empires. The fourth beast is described as terrifying and frightening and very powerful. We get that from Daniel 7, verse 7. It has 10 horns, and then a little horn emerges, which uproots 3 of the previous horns. This little horn has eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. So we get that from Daniel 7:8. And it is said to make war against the saints and to prevail against them. So historical figures and scholars have debated the meaning of the little horn and whether it represents the Antichrist. Some argue that the little horn refers to a historical figure, such as Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek king who ruled over the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BC. Antiochus Epiphanes is known for his persecution of the Jews and his attempts to force Hellenization upon them, which could be seen as a parallel to the Antichrist persecution of the saints. Others interpret the little horn as a symbol for a future ruler who will arise in the last days. This view is supported by Daniel 8, which describes another vision of a ram and a goat, with the goat representing a king who will arise from Greece and who will grow very great. But at the height of his power, the large horn will be broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns will emerge toward the 4 winds of heaven. Get that, Daniel 8:8. From one of these horns, a little horn emerges, which grows in power and becomes great, but then is destroyed. So some scholars identify this little horn with the Antichrist, while others interpret it as referring to a historical figure such as Antiochus Epiphanes or another ruler. The interpretation of the little horn in Daniel is closely related to the interpretation of the beast in Revelation, and some scholars see them as referring to the same figure. One notable historical figure who held a particular interpretation of the little horn in Daniel was Sir Isaac Newton. Newton believed that the little horn represented the papacy, and he saw the papacy as fulfilling many of the prophecies in Daniel and Revelation. He argued that the papacy would be destroyed and replaced by a more just and righteous form of Christianity. So Newton wrote pretty extensively on this issue and even provided more detail. Isaac Newton, for those not familiar, is a famous physicist and mathematician and even theologian, and he's known for his extensive research on biblical prophecy in the end times. He believed that the Bible contained like a hidden code that would reveal the future, including the coming of the Antichrist. So in his book, Observations upon the Prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of St. John, Newton analyzed various passages in the book of Daniel that describe the rise of a little horn that will wage war against the saints and speak blasphemy against God. He believed that this little horn was a symbol of the Antichrist who would emerge in the last days. Newton believed that the Antichrist would be a political and military leader who would arise out of the Roman Empire. He interpreted the legs of iron and feet of iron and clay in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2 as representing the Roman Empire, and saw the 10 horns on the 4th beast in Daniel 7 as representing 10 kingdoms that would arise out of the ruins of Rome. Newton also believed that the Antichrist would be Jewish and that he would rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He based this on his interpretation of Daniel 9:27, which speaks of a prince who will confirm a covenant with many for 7 years and then put an end to sacrifice and offering. Newton believed that this prince was a reference to the Antichrist who would make a treaty with the Jews and allow them to rebuild the temple. Newton also believed that the Antichrist would deceive people with false miracles and signs. Some people interpret Newton's writings as him saying he believed that the book of Revelation was a symbolic description of the events leading up to the end of the world, and that the Antichrist would use his powers to deceive people and lead them astray. Adding to that, though, it is important to note that in 1690 he wrote a letter to his friend Richard Bentley about his interpretation of the prophecies in the book of Daniel and Revelation, and he stated that he believed that the end of the world was still a long way off and that the Antichrist had not yet been revealed. In the letter he wrote, quote, "About the time of the end, a body of men will be raised up who will turn their attention to the prophecies and insist upon their literal interpretation in the midst of much clamor and opposition." End quote. Now that sounds a lot like today because we're seeing that a lot. We who take the Bible literally, we know what that's all about. Lots of opposition to that today. However, Newton's interpretation of the Antichrist has been subject to criticism, with some scholars suggesting that he read too much into the text and relied too heavily on his own preconceptions. Nevertheless, his work remains influential in the field of Bible prophecy and continues to be studied and debated by scholars today. So let's talk about the Gospels and epistles. There are references in the Gospels and epistles to a figure who opposes Christ or seeks to deceive believers. These references have been interpreted in various ways by many different people, leading to diverse interpretations of the Antichrist in Christian theology. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus warns his disciples about false messiahs and false prophets who will arise in the end times and deceive many. He tells them, quote, "For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect." That's Matthew 24:24. This warning has been interpreted by some as referring to the Antichrist or an Antichrist figure who will arise in the end times. Similarly, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus warns his disciples of those who will come in his name and deceive many, saying, this is Mark 13:22, "For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens, leading astray, if possible, the elect." Now, this warning has also been interpreted as referring to the Antichrist or an Antichrist-type figure. In the epistles, the Apostle John references the Antichrist in his first and second letters. He writes, quote, "Children, it is the last hour. As you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. For this we know that it is the last hour." That's 1 John 2:18. John goes on to describe the Antichrist as one who denies that Jesus is the Christ and denies the Father and Son, and that's 1 John 2:22. In his second letter, John warns his readers not to welcome those who do not bring the teachings of Christ, saying, quote, "If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him in your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works." End quote. That's 2 John 10 through 11. Some scholars interpret this warning as referring to the Antichrist or Antichrist figures who seek to deceive believers. Historical figures and scholars have interpreted these references to the Antichrist in many different ways. Some, such as the early church fathers, believed in a literal figure who would arise in the end times and oppose Christ and deceive believers. Others, such as Augustine of Hippo, believed that the Antichrist was a spiritual force or a symbol of the struggle between good and evil. Martin Luther believed that the papacy was the Antichrist, citing references in the Bible to a figure that who would oppose Christ and deceive believers. He wrote, quote, "I am persuaded that in this papacy there is more than enough of the spirit of Antichrist and more than enough of his power and tyranny, so that I am amazed that the world has not long since gone to the devil," end quote. And that's from Luther's Works, Volume 41, excuse me. According to some scholars, the term Antichrist is not specifically mentioned in the Gospels or the epistles, but there are passages that can be interpreted as referring to an Antichrist figure. One of the most significant is 1 John 2:18 through 22, which which again, we went through some of this, but we'll just read the whole passage. Children, it is the last hour, just as you heard that Antichrist is coming. Even now many Antichrists have appeared. From this we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not really of us, for if they had been of us, they would have remained with us. But they went out so that it would be shown that they all are not of us. But you have an anointing from the Holy One, and you all know. I have not written to you because you do not know the truth, but because you do know it, and because no lie is of the truth. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. End quote. Now, some say this passage suggests that there will be multiple antichrists rather than a singular figure, and that they will be characterized by a denial of the Father and the Son. Some scholars interpret this to mean a denial of the divinity of Christ, while others see it as a denial of the relationship between God the Father and Jesus the Son. Others say that this passage isn't trying to define the Antichrist in Revelation, but rather speaks of the spirit behind the Antichrist and the fact that this spirit is active today. Another important passage is 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 through 4, which says, "Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God." This passage is interpreted by some scholars as referring to an Antichrist figure who will oppose God and exalt himself above all other gods, even to the point of taking a seat in the temple of God and declaring himself to be God. Others see this as a reference to historical figures such as the Roman Empire Caligula, rather than an end times Antichrist. Now, in addition to these passages, there are several others that have been interpreted as referring to an Antichrist figure, including Matthew 24:24, 2 John 1:7, and Revelation 13:1 through 18. However, the interpretation of those passages are varied and have been debated among scholars for centuries. One notable interpretation of the Antichrist in the Gospels and Epistles is held by preterist scholars. So preterists believe that many of the prophecies in the Bible, including those regarding the Antichrist, have already been fulfilled in the past. They see the Antichrist as referring to a historical figure, such as the Roman Emperor Nero or the Jewish leader Bar Kokhba, rather than an end-time figure. Another interpretation is held by futurist scholars. This is the camp that I personally would fall into. And we believe that the prophecies regarding the Antichrist are yet to be fulfilled, and it'll be a future fulfillment. So futurists, they see the Antichrist as a future political or religious leader who will rise to power and deceive many people, ultimately leading to a final battle between good and evil. And again, personally, I find the futurist view to be the most convincing, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. But first, I want to backtrack a bit and discuss what ancient Jewish sources say about the Antichrist. So the concept of the Antichrist is not limited to Christian sources, but also exists in Jewish sources, both prior to the Old Testament and in Orthodox Judaism after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So the term Antichrist does not appear in Jewish scripture or rabbinic literature, but the idea of an ultimate adversary or evil person who will arise at the end of time is present in Jewish apocalyptic writings. So one of the earliest Jewish sources that mentions an ultimate adversary is the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century. So, for example, in the War Scroll, which describes a final battle between the forces of good and evil, there is a reference to a figure called the Lying Prophet, who is likely an early version of the Antichrist. So the text describes this figure as follows, quote, "In his day of trial, he will work great evil against God's covenant, and he will prosper in all that he does. He will be disdainful of truth, and everyone will say he is a prophet of God, but he is not." And that's, if you want the reference, it's 1 QM 12:11 through 12. In Orthodox Judaism, the concept of an ultimate adversary is associated with the figure of Armilus, who is described in various texts as a powerful and evil ruler who will arise at the end of days. So according to the Zohar, which is a central text of Jewish mysticism, Armilus is a descendant of Esau and will lead a great army against the Jews. He will be defeated by the Messiah and will then be killed by God. So the concept of Armilus has been interpreted in various ways throughout Jewish history, and some have suggested that he is a symbol of Rome, Christianity, or Islam. Another figure that has been associated with the Antichrist in Jewish sources is Gog and Magog, who are mentioned in the book of Ezekiel and in the book of Revelation. So in Jewish tradition, Gog and Magog are seen as evil nations that will rise up against Israel in the end of time. In the Talmud, Gog and Magog are identified with Rome, and the Roman Empire and the destruction of Rome is seen as a necessary precursor to the coming of the Messiah. So we can talk more about Gog and Magog. The Gog and Magog prophecy in Ezekiel and the passages about the Antichrist in other books of the Bible have also been topics of debate by theologians and scholars throughout history. While some say that they are the same figure, others believe that they are distinct entities. So the prophecy of Gog and Magog is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And in this passage, Gog is identified as the leader of Magog, which is believed to be a region in modern-day Russia. Others say maybe around Turkey, other areas. But according to the prophecy, Gog will lead an army against Israel in the end times, but God will intervene and defeat Gog and his army. Some scholars have suggested that Gog and Magog could be the same figure as the Antichrist described in the New Testament. They point to similarities in the description of the two figures, such as their attempts to destroy Israel and their ultimate defeat by God. However, others argue that they are distinct entities, citing differences in their description and the contexts in which they are presented. So, for a quick review, in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is described as a figure who will rise to power and lead a global rebellion against God. In Revelation 13:5-7, it says, "And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations." The Apostle Paul also mentions the Antichrist in 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4, saying, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a great falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." Some scholars believe the descriptions of the Antichrist in the New Testament and the prophecy of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel are too different to be the same figure. They argue that the Antichrist is presented as an individual who rises to power through deception and cunning, while Gog is presented as a leader of a powerful army. Others, however, suggest that there may be some overlap between the two figures. They point out that both the Antichrist and Gog attempt to destroy Israel, and both are ultimately defeated by God. Additionally, some scholars argue that the passage in Ezekiel is describing a broader conflict that will take place in the end times, and that Gog may be one of several leaders who will rise up against God's people. The Jewish sources also provide insights into the Gog and Magog prophecy. The Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, include a number of apocalyptic writings that describe the end times and the coming of Messiah. One of these writings that we already mentioned, the War Scroll, describes a final battle between the forces of good and evil in which the Messiah and his followers will triumph over their enemies. In Orthodox Judaism, the Gog and Magog prophecy is seen as a key part of end times. Some Jewish scholars believe that Gog and Magog are not specific individuals, but rather represent the enemies of the Jewish people throughout history. They view the prophecy as a metaphorical representation of the struggles that the Jewish people will face in the end times. So the comparison of Gog and Magog prophecy in Ezekiel to other biblical passages about the Antichrist uh, is also a topic of debate. Some see the two as distinct figures, while others believe they are one and the same. And the book of Revelation also mentions Gog and Magog, further complicating the interpretation of these prophecies. But regardless of whether Gog and Magog and the Antichrist are seen as separate or the same figure, both prophecies speak to the idea of a final battle between good and evil in the end times. In both cases, the outcome is clear. God will ultimately triumph over evil and establish his kingdom on earth. So now let's look at some modern interpretations. Futurism is a theological interpretation of biblical prophecy that believes the fulfillment of certain prophecies is yet to come in the future. So this includes the identity of the Antichrist, which is a topic that's, obviously it's an ongoing discussion in modern times. So many futurist scholars and writers, such as Dr. Thomas Horn, Chuck Missler, L.A. Marzulli, Ryan Pitterson, Joel Richardson, have put their own interpretations of who the Antichrist could be. So for those of you who do not know, Dr. Thomas Horn, my good friend, he's the CEO of Skywatch TV, and he's written extensively on the topic of the Antichrist. So Tom believes that the Antichrist will be a figure with, supernatural powers who will deceive the masses and lead them astray, and that the Antichrist will rise to power during a time of great chaos and destruction and will establish a new world order. In his book, Apollyon Rising 2012, The Lost Symbol Found and the Final Mystery of the Great Seal Revealed, Tom suggests that the Antichrist could be an ancient figure such as Nimrod or Osiris who will be resurrected in modern times. He also suggests that the Antichrist could be a genetically engineered being or a hybrid of human and fallen angel. Chuck Missler, a very well-known Bible teacher and author, also held, he passed away a few years ago, but he also held a futurist view of the Antichrist. Missler believed that the Antichrist would be a charismatic leader who would rise to power during a time of global crisis. He also believed that the Antichrist will establish a one-world government and will be opposed by a remnant of faithful believers. In his book, The Kingdom, Power, and Glory, The Overcomer's Handbook, Chuck Missler suggests that the Antichrist could be a literal descendant of the tribe of Dan, based on his interpretation of Genesis 49:17. He also suggests that the Antichrist could be a technological being created through genetic engineering or artificial intelligence. L.A. Marzulli, another good friend of mine, a researcher and author on the topics of biblical prophecy and the supernatural, also holds a futurist view of the Antichrist. So Marzulli believes that the Antichrist will be a supernatural being who will deceive the world and lead it into rebellion against God. In his book, The Revealing, Unlocking Hidden Truths on the Glorification of God's Children, L.A. suggests that the Antichrist could be an alien being who is masquerading as the savior of humanity. He also suggests that the Antichrist could be a transhuman being who has merged with technology and is no longer fully human. Ryan Pitterson, another good friend of mine. It seems like I'm just talking about all my friends here, but he's an author and researcher on the top. We got to get him on this show for an interview sometime. But he's an author and researcher on topics of biblical prophecy and the occult. He also holds a futurist view of the Antichrist. So Ryan Pitterson believes the Antichrist will be a powerful figure who will lead a global religion that's opposed to Christianity. So in his book, Judgment of the Nephilim, Pitterson suggests that the Antichrist could be a hybrid of human and fallen angel, similar to the Nephilim of Genesis 6. He also suggests that the Antichrist could be a technological being or a transhuman being who has merged with technology. Joel Richardson, which we've had him on the show before, great guy and very talented writer, and he's an author and filmmaker on the topics of biblical prophecy in the Middle East. He also holds a futurist view of the Antichrist. So he believes that the Antichrist will be a political and military leader who will rise to power in the Middle East and will lead an Islamic caliphate. So in his book, The Islamic Antichrist, The Shocking Truth About the Real Nature of the Beast, Joel Richardson suggests that the Antichrist could be a Muslim leader who will deceive the world by presenting himself as a peaceful, unifying figure. He cites the Quranic prophecy of a figure known as the Mahdi, whom many Muslims believe will appear in the end times to usher in a period of peace and justice. Richardson argues that this Mahdi figure could be the same as the biblical Antichrist. Another futurist perspective is presented by Chuck Missler, who believed that the Antichrist would be a powerful political leader who emerges from the European Union. He based that on his interpretation of Daniel's prophecy of the 10 toes on the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which he saw as representing 10 nations that will form a confederacy in the last days led by the Antichrist. Going back to Ryan Pitterson, he presents a unique perspective on the identity of the Antichrist in Judgment of the Nephilim. He believes that the Antichrist will be a hybrid, like human demon offspring, genetically engineered by fallen angels and their human partners. And he cites biblical passages about the Nephilim or giants as evidence for this theory. It's a phenomenal book, and his follow-up to that, too, is really good. You should check him out. Overall, the futurist interpretation of the identity of the Antichrist presents a diverse range of perspectives with varying degrees of support from biblical texts and historical sources. And while I'm on the topic, I may as well throw my own work into the ring. As an author, I have written extensively about the Antichrist and various interpretations of Bible prophecies related to the end times. One of my main arguments is that the Antichrist will likely be a figure who seeks to deceive the world by appearing to be a Messiah or Savior. I believe that this individual will emerge on the global scene at the time of great turmoil and chaos and will offer a false sense of peace and security to the nations of the world. And it's very likely that this will be the literal son of Satan, who Apollyon will possess and resurrect after the deadly head wound takes place. I've also explored the possible identity of the Antichrist in some of my other writings. So in my book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, I suggest that the Antichrist may be a political leader who emerges from the Middle East or possibly Europe, who may have some kind of tie-in with an alien/UFO deception and who seeks to unite the world under his rule. This leader may have ties to Islam, but may also appeal to other religious traditions in order to gain support from diverse populations. Another aspect of my research has been to explore the possible role of technology in the rise of the Antichrist. So I believe that technology will play a significant role in the deception of the nations, and that the Antichrist will use advanced technologies to manipulate and control people's minds and behaviors. This could include the use of AI, virtual reality, and other technologies that are currently in development. This, I believe, ties in heavily with the mark of the beast. It's also possible that the Antichrist may have ties to the New Age movement and other forms of occultism, and that he may use these beliefs to deceive people into following him. So overall, my research on the Antichrist and end times prophecy is focused on helping people to understand the signs of the times and to prepare themselves for the coming of the Lord. I believe that we are living in a critical moment in human history, and that the events of the next few years could have profound implications for the future of humanity. And it's my hope that by exploring these topics, we can gain a better sense, a better understanding of what is happening in the world around us, and how we can respond with faith and hope. So, in conclusion, there's a wide variety of interpretations regarding the Antichrist found in both biblical and non-biblical sources throughout history. While there are many different opinions on the identity and nature of this figure, it is important for Christians not to allow these differences to divide us. And instead we should focus on doing our own research and coming to our own conclusions about this very important topic. We must remember that the ultimate goal of studying the Antichrist is not to argue about who is right or wrong, but to deepen our understanding of the Bible and the prophecies contained within it. We should approach this topic with humility, recognizing that our understanding may be limited and that we may not have all of the answers. At the same time, we must also treat each other with love and respect, even if we disagree on a certain interpretation. So Jesus taught us to love our neighbors as ourselves, and this includes those who may have different views on the Antichrist. We can engage in respectful dialogue and debate without resorting to personal attacks or animosity. So ultimately, our focus should be on living out the teachings of Jesus rather than getting bogged down in theological debates. Theological discussion is important, of course, but not at the cost of forsaking the love Jesus commands us to have for one another. We should strive to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. By doing so, we can fulfill Jesus' commandment and be the light of the world, shining brightly for all to see. So that is it. That is all I have for you. That is the Antrichrist Enigma. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you like this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe. Give us a like. Give us a comment. I would love to know what you think. Who do you think the Antichrist is? What interpretation are you most convinced by, and why? I'd love to read your comments. And please share this video around. And again, we would love it if you would come and be a member at dailyrenegade.com, and you get way more content than is available on YouTube, and with more coming. There's even like free documentaries and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of perks to being a member at Daily Renegade. So dailyrenegade.com, that is the website. All right, so that is all for today's episode. Thank you again so much for joining me, and until next time, take care and God bless. I do want to just initially say thank you to everybody who has supported us through Nathan's journey. For those who aren't familiar, maybe you're just joining for the first time. For the past few years, my son my very young son, he's 8 now, but he's been dealing with cancer and remission, and now he's in... he's seeing a holistic health practitioner to cleanse his body from all the damage that the chemo did, which is actually really, really extensive. So the thing about that is it's not covered by insurance, of course, because it's real medicine and insurance doesn't have a stake in that apparently. But so we have to pay that out of pocket. So we want to thank everybody who has helped support us. Not only through prayer and just general love and encouragement, but also financially. It's been a huge help. For those, if you want to know how you can help, if you want to help Nathan, best way to do it is just look in the links in the description below. I believe there should be a PayPal address there. Christina posted something on my wall about all this, and I'll just read it because it gives all the information on how to donate if you want. But she wrote, "Josh and I are so thankful for everyone over the years who has been there for us regarding Nathan. He is alive today because of all your generous support. Nathan now goes in for a holistic, completely natural and clean detox every week to undo the leftover damage done by the years of chemotherapy on the long road of recovery, which, as you can imagine, is very costly. Real holistic, all-natural medicine tends to be. Insurance, of course, doesn't cover any of this, but like we tell Nathan, we refuse to put a price on his health. Nathan is getting better every day and loves his new natural health regimen. If you feel led to help us with Nathan's detox, we would be extremely grateful. The best way is either through PayPal or Cash App, and we also have a P.O. box listed below, and of course, we value everyone's prayers. Thank you so much for helping keep our little guy around. Nathan loves you all." And then the PayPal link is paypal.me/Josh Peck Disclosure. All one word. JoshPeckDisclosure. And then the Cash App is the $ Josh Scott Peck. All one word. JoshScottPeck. And then our P.O. Box is Josh and Christina Peck. P.O. Box 396, Crane, Missouri 65633. The easiest way is through PayPal, but I just wanted to get that out of the way first, and I wanted to thank everybody who has helped and who's kept us in prayer and who's been able to help financially as well. Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation.
Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on the Cornerstone Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times.